Thank you very much, Liz. It's been a joy working with you and Janelle, getting ready to do this. I'm incredibly excited about this particular session. I've been working and preparing for it for quite some time. And I'm eager to get a reaction from the people who are connected. We had a lot of registrations for this event, near 200 as I recall. And that tells me that maybe you'll be interested too. Hope so. The key thing here is the ClinOps technology adoption curve. We'll get to that in just a minute. The first thing I want to do is try to set the stage for our topic today. So let's jump in. So, beyond my bio, of course, this simple statement, you need this software. Well, of course, that begs the question of, you need what software? And who are you, by the way? Anyway, so I'm starting with you need this software because it seems to be, if you're in ClinOps today, that's the message you're getting a lot. You need this software, and that's coming from a software vendor. So bear in mind, I know that of which I speak. You need this software. And what I mean by this is I've built this word cloud of all, well, not even all. This was right off the top of my head of the names of categories of software that I see every day being presented to the ClinOps world and saying, you need this software. And I didn't even work at this. I bet I could double or triple this. I was thinking if we had a game show, I would say, give me 10 more product categories for ClinOps. Because as you know, every stage of clinical operations has software available. There's quality software, there's patient onboarding software, there's board interaction software, there's CTMS, eTMF. Sometimes I feel like I should sing the Michael Jackson song, ABC, 1, 2, 3. Some more clinical software just for me. I made that up right now. And that's what you get with me, so settle in. So why? And the message you hear are on the screen. Ensure compliance. Make sure you accelerate your trials. Need to get them done faster, save a lot of money. Be inspection ready. Don't get caught being out of compliance. Improve quality. Scale it up quickly. All these messages. So that's what we're bombarded with. You need this software. And the software you need is the software that someone thinks you need. And those are some of the messages. So you can see, I'm trying to undercut some of this with a reality check. And that's been this focus of my current research, which is, well, what software do you need? And when do you need it? And I think, I'm hopeful, I have a start on a methodology for answering that. And that's what we're going to focus on. So just as a quick fun thing, guess how many software products are listed in Capterra's clinical trial management category. Capterra is a software review and rating product. So you can go to Capterra and say, tell me about products in a software category like payroll software. And it will give you a list of different products and you can rate them and you can compare them as this comparison shows on the screen. In fact, this comparison on the screen is for clinical trial management software. And they don't mean CTMS in particular, they mean broadly spoken software for clinical operations. So guess how many? You know, what do I see on screen? 10 or so? Well, get ready for 18 pages of that. 188 products are listed in Capterra's ClinOps software category, including Agatha. So there's a lot out there, a lot of messages, a lot to sort through. So the real question isn't just, you need this software, why do I need it? It's which software do I, in my situation, need next? And by me, I mean you. As a ClinOps leader, what software do you need next? Where should I invest next? So how do I work through that? And that's where I came up with the ClinOps technology adoption curve as a tool for this. I spent much of my career, too much of my career perhaps, in management consulting roles. I worked with and at companies like what was then Coopers & Lybrand, some work at McKinsey, smaller shops. And what we do is we build models, right? That's what management consultants do. Then you write books about those models, everyone buys your book and you get rich and famous. I'm not going to get rich and famous from the ClinOps adoption curve, but it is an interesting tool, or I hope it is. Let's see, you'll decide, not me. So here it is. This is the ClinOps technology adoption curve as its simplest. And you're going to see it's a 5-stage model that we climb up, we evolve up over time. And this is my thesis. I've tested it with some real world organizations, and I want to test it with a lot more, maybe yours if you'll let me. And here are the stages. I'm going to go through them one by one. First, just by labels. Stage 1, basic tools. Stage 2, core systems. Stage 3, automated processes, unit automation, I call it when I'm feeling fancy. Stage 4, end-to-end process connections. That really means integration. And stage 5, kind of the digital world, the fully digitized model, included collaboration between stakeholders. So we're going to talk about these one by one. And as I do this, I want to introduce a mini game of where's Waldo, meaning place yourself on this curve. So here we go. Stage 1. Oops, I'm wrong. Sorry, I misguessed my slides. So of course I want to take away something first about the ClinOps technology adoption curve. It is a simple tool, hopefully not too simplistic, but I want to grant that it won't answer the question, what software do you need to invest in next? That's going to require more questions answered. What does your organization do? Meaning, are you a pharma company, a biotech, a medtech company? How big is your organization? What do you outsource today? How do you use CROs? How are you connected to sites? And where are you today in the organization? Are you a young startup, or where are you heading? What's coming up next? More trials, acquisitions? When do you need to get where you're going? What's going to be the obstacles? What will block your path? So there's a lot of questions to answer. But first, let me come back to the adoption curve as a starting point. And that's how I mean it to be, a starting point on a process. Let's go through the stages. So stage 1, I work with many stage 1 companies. It's characterized, this ClinOps company or organization is characterized by manual, sometimes we call them paper-based processes. Often there's not truly all paper-based. There's spreadsheets, there's emails, there's Word documents. But the idea is these are not software automation systems. These are tools. And in stage 1, typically an early stage clinical company with 1 or 2 trials, probably small, they got started, and they got started by collecting things the way one does. In particular, they're probably storing stuff in shared folders or Box or Dropbox or something. And the key issue there is, for any stage 1 company, or should be anyway, compliance. That there are big issues with compliance if you're using those kind of tools for storing and sharing your content. And that's the focus of a stage 1 company, and getting to stage 2 is about dealing with compliance. Obviously a very broad statement, but I hope in that broadness, in the stereotyping, there's a lot of truth. Stage 2 company. So a stage 2 company now has unit automation in place, unit systems, if you will, standalone systems. You recognize the alphabet soup of that, the clinical trial management system, the trial master file system, or eTMF. The data collection, the electronic data collection, or EDC tool, and many others. And these are unit-based software solutions that are meant to act primarily as storage places, storage and tracking. So now we're not using Box or a shared folder. We're now using an appropriate place that has compliance tools like version control, check-in, check-out. And it's all about, in the United States, 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. So now at stage 2, you've got that. You've addressed your core compliance things. You've got these core tools in place, especially for storage and tracking. And life is good, right? So stage 2 makes sense. You got the basics in place. So what does stage 3 look like? Stage 3 starts to go from a focus on storage and tracking to a focus specifically on process. So stage 3 organizations have shifted from focusing on a specific unit process, like trial master file management, and starting to focus on the processes, not just the storage. So I think of this as the process automation storage. It still tends to be on a unit basis, not a lot of integration. But now it's about scaling those processes without losing control. And that means things like workflows, reviews, and approvals that are very difficult to do with email, and scaling those quickly and doing that within individual software products, and many more of them as well, I should emphasize. I'm moving on to slide 12. On slide 12, we were looking at stage 4, and on stage 4, there's particularly a focus on integration. So now I've got software tools in place, I've got a lot of automated processes. Now I'm trying to connect those processes and connect the stakeholders. And we'll talk more about that. This is as an example when you're connecting sites and sponsors and CROs together, working together with documents as opposed to individually in separate units. And then stage 5 is sort of the halcyon look of where we want to get to, a fully digitized, automated world where all the stakeholders are connected, and not just for storage and not just for processes, but in soft ways as well. Softer ways that have to do with trial startup activities, working with boards and those types of things. So that's the 4 stages. And as I said, a little game of where's Waldo? I stuck Waldo in there. Think about where you are. Think about where your organization is. And go back to my point that this is a starting point to think about where an organization can most profitably invest. Now, I'm going to come back to that as we move forward, but I want to take a pause and ask our moderator, Liz, as we agreed we would do, to check and see if we have any questions having come in yet. And I'll try to do those before I leave this slide. Go ahead, Liz.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. All right. And we do have a couple of questions. So perfect stopping point here. Do you think that different types of companies, so biotech versus pharma versus med device, might actually have different stages with different priorities as they build out their technology infrastructure?
Kind of an easy question to answer simply, which is absolutely. So I've emphasized that this as a starting point, but let's use a med tech or a medical device company as an example. Now there, and in fact, I have an example of this later, there's going to be a big focus on quality because they make widgets, or they have widgets made for them through an outsourcer. So the need to have quality systems in place that relate to a manufacturer of widgets as opposed to a biotech can be very, very different. So that's an example of, yes, I think there's a lot of wiggle room, a lot of play on this curve for what would be the focus depending on the type of company, depending on the type of things they do and the type of trials they have as well. Cancer drug manufacturer is going to be very, very different than an RNA organization. So the simple answer is yes, and thank you for the question, Liz.
Okay, great. Thank you for that response. And moving on to our next question here. So I think I disagree with the fact that integration is pushed off until stage 3. I think emphasizing integration between systems from the first investments in technology is really important to make sure you don't end up with islands of automation or silos.
Wow, what an interesting and frankly difficult question to take on in a venue like this where you want to be pithy and you really need to delve in. There's a really good argument there, but I'm a very agreeable person, but fundamentally I would probably end up disagreeing. We'd have to get very specific. But here's the reason. When you take on the integration between systems, you take on the hardest part with the lowest benefit. You take on the hardest part in terms of integrating systems, and you take on the part that is important, but it's less important than compliance, getting processes fundamentally automated, etc. This could be as simple as the phrase boiling the ocean, that taking on full integration between systems from the outset is a bit like boiling the ocean and kind of difficult to achieve, and you're putting off the payoffs that you get from those first steps. There's a lot that I could say there. I'm going to finish it by saying many people I deal with over the many, many years now say, I want all the systems to come from the same vendor. That way they'll all work together. And there's two problems with that. One is you're boiling the ocean, you're taking on a big thing. The other is dirty little secret, I say as I lean forward. Just because all the systems come from the same vendor doesn't mean they all work together. A lot of those are acquired systems and they're patched together like any other system. So quite a topic we could dig into. Do you have any more questions for this phase, Liz?
Yeah, and thank you for that response. And we'll dive into one more question here before I hand it back over to you. So I think the role of EDC software or tools is underplayed in this model. Getting the data right from the first is absolutely critical.
What an interesting perspective. I have a feeling this person asking this question is correct. I have a feeling they're correct. And it probably is a prejudice for me because I don't deal with the data side anywhere near as much as I deal with the documents, file, content side. So I think I'm going to leave it at that and say I have some work to do to think about how does EDC play into this. So getting the data right is a huge priority. It's the thing we're all most vulnerable to. It not only for approval of a drug, but for the safety of the users and everything else. So maybe this whole thing should have as a platform underneath, get the data right, and then move on from there. So thanks for that question, whoever sent it. And thank you, Liz. I'll jump back in and we'll see if there's more questions as we move along. Okay. So thanks for those questions. I can tell at least 3 people, unless one person asked all the questions, 3 people are paying attention, and that's exciting to me. So did you play Where's Waldo? Where are you? Where is your organization? Stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pretty easy to tell. I have questions that are in survey format that would inform the answer, but it's pretty obvious. Now, as I said, that's not enough to answer the question. To say I'm a stage 2 company and my focus should be on process automation within individual process areas doesn't answer the question of, but which software do I need? Which process do I need? Do I need to focus more on a CTMS or a trial master file system? And that's because there's more questions. There's other key factors. I mentioned some of these before, the size of the organization and team, and in particular, what you do in the trial world. So what kind of trials do you do? How big are these trials? How many sites are involved? What phase are they even, of course? Where are you in the submission cycle? So where is that in your future, 5 years away or 5 months away? There's issues around the complexity of trials having to do with the financial management, because that can affect which software is the right investment. If you have a lot of financial complexity and inventory complexity, then a CTMS might be the right thing for you next. If you don't, then a CTMS is probably overkill. In fact, in a separate webinar and a different blog, I'm talking about a CTMS Lite and what it looks like when you don't need those things. Different topic for next time. So all those things go into this question of where are you and where should you go and what software will give you the biggest bang for the buck. Now, in a way, I want to go backwards just for a second. We'll go back to Where's Waldo and talk about the curve. You notice the steep part of this curve is right here. That's not just for aesthetics. This is where investments pay off the most. So the first investments are about compliance, necessary foundation. Then you get some big paybacks in this area. And then those paybacks from additional software actually do have diminishing returns, at least in my opinion. So the big bang is getting the basic systems automated and starting to get processes automated and being able to scale from there. Then there's incremental benefits for sure from more more integration and more collaboration. So I just wanted to mention something about the paybacks, because I'm going to talk about paybacks next, in fact. So if the curve gives you a starting point, says what should your focus be on, what problem do you probably need to solve as that phase organization, where do you go from there? And the answer for me comes from 2 additional tools. Now, these are not my tools. These are standard analytical tools. And as I often say, I have a fancy MBA from a fancy school, and I have to do something with it. And these are a couple of things that business school students would enjoy using. A gap analysis is a really simple one, as old as time it feels. And what's a gap analysis? Notice the less than happy face on the left and the happy face on the right. This is where are you and where do you want to be? Current state and future state. As a simple example, I volunteer on the board for a soup kitchen, and we just did a current state, future state analysis. Where are we today? What is the population we're serving? What are the services we're doing? And where do we want to be as an organization? What's the future state of the Claremont Soup Kitchen? So we did this, and then you identify the gap. What is between where we are today and where we want to be? And then you break that down and say, okay, what are the steps we can take to overcome that gap? What are the initiatives we need to do? We need to have an additional fundraising arm. We need to hire an executive director, whatever those steps are. And we can do this the same way for our analysis of software appropriate for a ClinOps organization. Where is our operation today? What are we doing today? And where do we want to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years from now? Where do we want to be in our abilities, our capabilities, the kind of trials we're working on, our size? And if we identify that future step, then we can break down, okay, now I can see the gap. What do we do to close the gap? Often that's called a gap analysis. So current state, future state, you'll hear gap analysis. And all of this will inform the right software investments for you, because the right software shouldn't be based on a vendor's pitch. It should be based on your current state and your future state. Now, similarly, an ROI analysis, we all know that stands for return on investment. And at its most simple, as the picture says, it's what are you going to get and how much is it going to cost? And that's your return on investment. Now, of course, the world has way overcomplicated everything, and that includes ROI analysis. So the big questions are, when you say a return, how do we declare in dollars the return from increased compliance? How do we express in dollars the benefit of reduced risk and being inspection ready? These are hard questions. And when we talk about the investment, we say the cost. What do we mean? Do we mean the out-of-pocket cost in cash? Do we mean other hard-to-measure costs? And the answer is we should include everything we can. But translating some of those less than hard costs into hard costs is difficult. I'll give you an example of a bad ROI analysis. For many years in the life sciences industry, people would justify investment in software by paper savings. And when I say paper savings, I mean paper. You know, there's a cost to handle each piece of paper. If we can reduce the handling of each paper, or reduce the paper that gets handled, excuse my confusion there, then we have some math to do. How many reduced touches on that paper do we have? If each one costs us $1.10, that's how much we've saved. I don't find those kind of analyses useful. I like to get much more specific on how the investment is going to enable the growth. So an ROI analysis is very, very useful, but the devil is in the details for that. And, you know, I have my ways of doing it. You could have your ways. It's easier today because most software is purchased on the SaaS model, software as a service. So your costs are very explicit. How much is the subscription per year? A lot easier than it used to be, where you used to have to amortize the cost of an initial license over how many years you're going to use it. So it's getting easier to measure the benefit. And by the way, as a side mention on SaaS software, it's a wonderful model because you get to vote every year on whether to keep the software. Since it's a subscription, you're not committed for the next 10 years to use a software product. You have the vendor on a short leash. Vendor better deliver, vendor better be terrific, product better be terrific, or hey, I'll stop my subscription and use the next one. So I'm a big fan of the SaaS model, and I'm a software vendor, so that says something. But I think it's a win-win. I think keeps the vendor on their toes, make sure we deliver the value. It's a better economic model. So yay, SaaS. That's what I have to say about that. So if these are two additional tools on top of the curve, what I want to do next is just give a couple of examples, a couple of applications of this thinking, if you will. By the way, I'm going to foreshadow that I have a lot more coming on this. There's a blog I've written, there's an ebook coming, and I'm working with some customers on a no-cost basis to do these analyses to see whether this methodology holds up. As I said, if I could, I'd write the book and be rich and famous. Probably not a call for a book, but there'll be a call for a nice long paper. So that's what I'm looking for, is some people to work with, and I'll tell you about that later. First, let's give the examples. So I want to use two examples. They are made up examples, but they're, whoops, I did that thing that Janelle said I would do. I clicked on the slide. Here's the examples I want to go through. And I was just saying that these are made up names, but real companies. These are organizations I know quite well. So let's talk about the first one. I call them EagerMedTech. I gave them a logo of an eager beaver. EagerMedTech is about 5 years old. They're a manufacturer, medical device company. The manufacturing is outsourced. They don't do it. They have one trial underway and another expected. Their trials are small, like many medtech organizations. Their trials are much smaller. This is just about 10 sites and 100 patients. They are a stage 1 company, so they're using spreadsheets to track trial activity. They're using Box to collect and store documents. They do have a CRO who does the data side, and they have new venture capital arriving. They have money to spend, if you will, and they're trying to figure out where they should invest. And that question, as you would think, starts with, well, where are you on the adoption curve? So think about that for a second. See the bullets here, 5 years old, using Box, et cetera. I'm pretty sure you can guess where they are on the curve. There we go, forward. So I put Eager Beaver company, EagerMedTech, down at stage 1. There they are, which means we think, based on the curve, their focus should be on compliance first and foremost. Now, we got a question before that Liz shared about maybe we should be looking at integration earlier. Hold that thought a minute, because this is where it really proves that this curve is useful and a starting point, but wait, there's more, because you don't have to go one stage at a time. That's the magic. So let's think about that. So here's, in this case, Waldo. Waldo is Eager Beaver, and he's down at stage 1. But let's think about this a little more deeply. This is a med tech company, not a biotech, not a pharma, and they outsource their manufacturing. So where should they invest? All we know is you better deal with compliance. Where do we go from there? Now, just for convenience, I'm showing Agatha's product lineup here. This is my company's product lineup, but it's really just an illustration. This is just a core 5 of our tools. We have a eTMF, trial master file system. We have a remote monitoring system for the site side of clinical trials. Some people would call it an EISF, or investigator site file. We have an SOP management system, a quality management system, and a regulatory management system. So which of these is right for EagerMedTech? And that's where a lot more questions have to be asked, because all we know is you better deal with compliance. So in my simplistic model here, just to illustrate, I slashed out 2 I'm pretty sure they don't need. Probably don't need Agatha regulatory, because they have no submissions in the near term. You could argue it's a good time to start collecting things for the submission later. I get you. I hear you. But we have to make some decisions on priorities here, and I don't think that's their priority. I also crossed out the electronic investigator site file solution for the site side, because these are small trials with only a few sites, and I'm not sure that it would be worth the investment or the bang for the buck. Again, we have to make priority decisions. But whether they should invest in a trial master file system, an SOP and quality doc system, or a true quality system that manages corrective actions, defects, etc., not clear from anything I listed. That's where we have to go deeper. We have to do some gap analysis of where they're trying to go, and then ultimately some ROI analysis of which of these will pay back or deliver the biggest bang for the buck. I'll tell you, in real life, this company decided on SOP and quality, that as a manufacturer, even though they outsourced their manufacturing, they needed a place to keep all their quality documents, vendor audits, etc., and a place to manage defects. Even though they use an outsourced manufacturer, they want to manage those processes themselves. And they voted for that with their dollars rather than starting with the TMF. So that was an interesting situation. But notice that I got off track there, because the audience today is ClinOps. And this is a story of, yes, a ClinOps organization, but the investment was driven in another way. So I kind of mangled things a little bit, but I think you're with me. Be patient. Let me give you another example that really illustrates the thinking about jumping stages. So this is Rocket Biopharma. I gave them a logo of a little rocket. Remember clip art? I'm still a clip art guy. So Rocket Biopharma, 12 years old, been around longer. They have their 5th trial starting. It's a big trial, 40 sites, 1,000 patients, getting closer to a submission. They're not using a CRO. And they have lots of systems in place. They have a CTMS, an EDC, a TMF system in place. So where should they invest next based on what they're doing? Again, we need to look at where they are in the curve, look at current state, future state. Let's look at where they are in the curve. What do we know? They have these core systems in place. So they're pretty well getting reasonably along the technology adoption curve. In this case, I put the rocket for Waldo between 2 and 3. They've got core systems in place. And because I know this company, I know that they've automated within processes a fair amount. So where should they invest based on this? And what we know is it should, based on the curve, it should be in process automation and probably increasing integration, especially because remember the size of these trials, lots of sites, lots of patients, lots of principal investigators and sub-PIs. So they have a lot going on, a lot of pieces coming together, and investing in those connections and automating those processes of connection makes a lot of sense to me. It still doesn't answer the whole question, of course. So we can say where their focus should be broadly, and then we need to get specific. And I think you'll be fascinated by this, because you wouldn't have thought this. They actually invested in a new trial master file system. This is an Agatha customer, so it was our eTMF. And you could say, wait, didn't you just say they had a TMF? And I said, yes, they did. Absolutely. And aren't they focused more on process and automation? I said, they should be. And because a TMF is not a TMF, is not a TMF, it still was the right answer. So take a look. A traditional view of a TMF is storage, right? It's a file cabinet. That's why I use this image. It includes documents and forms, files, things that were created over the course of the trial that have to be stored and managed and kept pristine for regulatory reasons. It has to include everything. If a CRO is involved, it's their stuff too, and clinical site information, certain documents from the ISF. So we all know that, and they had that in place. They had a traditional eTMF that was electronic and was focused on storage. So why would they say what we need to do is invest in a TMF? Let me explain. That's because the view of a TMF is changing, and we can view it as a process hub today. It's a process hub for things like reviews and approvals and documents. It can be a process hub even for remote monitoring of sites, as I'll show you in a minute. It's a way to manage communication and coordination between stakeholders, between sponsors and CROs and sites. So today, an eTMF is much more than storage. It's a process hub connecting lots of pieces of the clinical trial puzzle. And then, as they say in the best infomercials, but wait, there's more. So today, a TMF can be really the centerpiece, the hub for a decentralized digital trial world. Let me break down this picture for you. I have a sponsor on the left, nice big corporate building. I have a CRO here on the top left, lots of people working on lots of things. I have the sites. A TMF today can be not just a place to store documents by the CRO and sponsor, but a place to, yes, sites set of the TMF, the investigator site file. So they can each have their own workspace in the cloud and investigator site file. And because we can do that, that means a CRO or someone from the sponsor can play a monitoring and oversight role. They can inspect those documents. And because they're all connected, we can do things like review and approvals between participants at the site level, the CRO and the sponsor. And because we're doing all that, we can keep track of it all and report on it with KPIs and metrics. So we've got a lot going on in a modern TMF. We're storing things, we're tracking them, we're just really doing a lot in order to keep the whole environment connected and all the stakeholders connected. So a modern TMF is really interesting from the curve perspective because it's not just going from one stage to another. In fact, let me go back, if I may, and look at the curve. because by investing in this TMF, this organization, Rocket, is not just solving a phase 2 or stage 2 problem. They're boosting themselves up to stage 4 by connecting many participants. So do you see how this works? The stages help us understand what the focus overall should be from a business perspective. The further analysis gives us an idea of which process activities, which parts should be the focus. And then an ROI analysis can help us choose the specific product, the vendor, etc. And that's how the three are meant to work together. So this is the first time I'm delivering this content. There is a blog about it that I'm going to show you in a minute. But the surprise for me is that it went quicker than I thought. So we're going to take some questions in just a second. But in my experience, when a speaker says they're going to take questions, a lot of people drop right off. So hold 1 second, if you will. I just want you to see something. It's an offer from me. So I want you to first know that this blog exists. This is a written version of what I've just gone through. ClinOps software, where should you invest next? And it's a written version, literally. There's a QR code there. If you take your camera, and I'll leave this up for a second, if you take your camera and scan that, it will link you to that blog. It's a short 3-4 pager. And I'm offering that to you just because you might have use for it internally or as a reminder. So it's also on the Agatha website, which is agathahealth.com. And as I said, there's going to be an ebook version as well, a little more complete of an academic treatment, and then a tool set, including the tools and methods for the questionnaires and the actual ROI analysis and gap analysis tools. So there's a lot there, and that's one offer. Another offer, before I take the last set of questions, is to join me. So I'm looking for about 10 organizations to do an assessment or audit. These can be confidential. I'm not looking to publish your name, but I'm interested in your own situation, asking you some questions, using my tools in about a 2-hour interview. And out of that, I'll deliver to you a formal gap analysis document and recommendation on investments that will pay off the most in your organization to take you from where you are to where you want to go. I have to make you a commitment because I run a software company. This will not be me trying to get you to buy my software. If you decide you like my software, that's great, and we'll do that. But this is more on my professorial side. I'm a frustrated college professor, meaning I'm not one, and I wish I was. So this is my way of doing that. So if you want to take advantage of that, just reach out to me. On the next slide, I believe, I put my email address, ken.lowney at agathalife.com. We use 2 URLs. And I'd be happy to work with you. So ken.lowney at agathalife, I'll get it right, agathalife.com. Now, I hope, Liz, you're still paying attention because I didn't mean to go so far without questions. I'm going backwards in the deck, and I am happy to take any more if any more came in.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ken, and thanks for that presentation. So we do have a couple of questions to get through here. That said, to the audience, if you do have questions that you haven't submitted yet, don't be shy. Feel free to still submit those questions, and we'll address them on today's webinar. But just to dive into our next question here for you, Ken. Is a complete methodology available with all of the questions included to aid as a decision-making tool when analyzing technology investments?
So it's a 2-part answer. The first is no, not yet, because it's work in progress. This is kind of in the language of many of the audience. This is preprint. So I'm sharing it with you early, but that's my goal, is to have that complete tool set. So stay in touch or take me up on my offer to work with your company, and you'll get, I guess I'll call it the beta version of those tools as we do that work together. I do want to emphasize I'm looking for about 2 hours of interview and discuss time. Then I produce a deliverable, and then we can walk through the deliverable and you can use it as you will. So thanks, Liz.
Great. Perfect. All right. And it looks like we have another question here. Where do newer technologies fit into this model? And what about the role of AI and blockchain and how they impact clinical trials?
I think I'm going to get in trouble for this answer. I sense I'll get some hate mail in some ways. Let me explain why. I have done the classic presentation, just like this one, on the future of AI and blockchain in clinical trials. And I am a believer that there's real value potentially in both those areas. AI is, first of all, AI is an AI, meaning there's a million things that fall under the AI umbrella, but there's some things in the AI world that absolutely will benefit clinical trials, actually are in improving clinical trials. And Agatha is one of the participants in that. Simple example, very simple AI, well-proven AI, 30-year-old AI, believe it or not, can recognize documents by type and category. So instead of you uploading documents and saying, this is a blank, the computer can say, it looks a lot like a blank. I think this is prior authorization form. So I'm going to categorize it as that for you because I'm a smart computer. So yeah, AI has a role and those things are coming in as enhancements. Blockchain's much more interesting in this and a whole different discussion. But here's where I'm going to get in trouble. I think these are marginal improvements. I think, yeah, it's important. This is the way it is with any technology. I'm being simplistic, but think of a car. The first cars were, once they work, were pretty amazing. You could go 10 times farther on a trip than you could with a horse. Now our marginal improvements are very small things. Like my daughter just got a car and it has a heated steering wheel. It's a nice thing, but it's not essential to the key function. And that's how I feel about some of the technologies that are added in this world of software, which is we add things. Rarely are they transformational. They're incremental. So that's how I feel about those two technologies, Liz. That's where I'm going to get the hate mail because someone's going to say, you don't understand. AI is going to change the world. And we'll have that debate some other time. Any other questions, Liz?
Yeah, actually, one more for you here, Ken. So in your experience, what percentage of investors are at each stage of the adoption curve?
First, I have to say how I understand the question. The way I hear it, since the word is what percentage of investors, when I hear the word investors, I often think venture capital investors, et cetera. I'm not hearing it that way. I'm hearing what percentage of people, ClinOps people, are making investments at those different phases. That's a hard one to answer, but I'm, as always, happy to talk about it. My organization, Agatha, really spends a lot of time with smaller organizations, 10 people to 1,000 people. This is the smaller emerging stage companies. And there's a tremendous amount of investment in stage 1, 2, and 3 there. Tremendous amount. CROs, especially big CROs, I see investing a lot more towards the top. Their services organizations, and the more efficient they are in how they do things, the more money they make because they charge you, the sponsor, by what they do. So I see investors of different types in different places. And of course, big pharma, traditional big pharma has done stages 1, 2, 3, 4 for a long time in most cases. So they're really on integration and then optimization with the next thing. So I didn't answer the question percentage of investors. I talked about types of investors, types of organizations that are in different places. And the only last thing I'll repeat is in my world, I see a tremendous amount of investment in stage 1, 2, 3. And that's because there's so much payoff there to get compliant, to get things stored appropriately, to get basic processes in place enables the first spurt of growth in a ClinOps company. It allows you to go from half a trial to 5 or 10 trials. Then we can look at more investments. So, Liz, I always apologize. People ask simple questions and I talk for hours, but that's just what you get.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that response. That was great. And I would like to thank everyone in attendance today for attending this Fierce Biotech webinar and for submitting so many great questions. I'd like to thank Ken again for that presentation and for participating, and Agatha for presenting today's webinar. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this webinar has been recorded and you will be able to access that recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.